A heartless police officer attacks a pregnant woman in broad daylight. But just one day later, his world crumbles as secrets unravel and the power of family bonds takes center stage. This story is not just about justice, but also about redemption and the hidden strength of love and resilience. Follow this emotional journey of a man who will do whatever it takes to protect the ones he loves. Before diving in, share where you're watching from and don't forget to subscribe for more heartfelt stories. The town of Clearbrook was known for its serene landscapes and close-knit community. Lush trees lined the streets, their leaves whispering in the gentle breeze, while children's laughter echoed from the nearby park. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other, and kindness seemed second nature. That morning, Laura Harris, a radiant woman 6 months pregnant, stepped out of her modest white brick home. Her pastel maternity dress swayed gently as she walked, and her hand rested lovingly on her rounded belly. She spoke softly to her unborn child, a joyful smile gracing her lips. "Today, we're making Dad's favorite lasagna for dinner. I think you'll like it too." Her husband, Jacob, was away on a business trip, and Laura wanted everything to be perfect for his return. As she walked to the local market, neighbors greeted her warmly. Mr. Allen, the baker, waved from across the street. "Good morning, Laura. How's the little one?" "We're doing well, Mr. Allen," Laura replied with a bright smile. "I'll stop by later for some of that cinnamon bread Jacob loves." The town's tranquility was disrupted suddenly. A police cruiser, driven aggressively, screeched to a halt near Laura. Startled, she turned to see Officer Brian Dempsey step out, his imposing figure and stern expression casting an unsettling shadow. Though new to Clearbrook, Brian had quickly gained notoriety for his harsh demeanor and unapologetic arrogance. "Stop right there," Brian barked, his voice laced with authority. Laura, confused, paused. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked politely, her heart beginning to race. "Let me see your ID," Brian demanded, his gaze cold and suspicious. Laura hesitated but reached for her bag, handing over her ID. "I'm just heading to the market," she explained, keeping her tone calm despite the unease rising within her. Brian barely glanced at the card before tossing it back to her with a sneer. "What are you doing wandering around here? You look suspicious." A small crowd began to gather at a distance, their murmurs blending with the morning breeze. Some raised their phones, capturing the escalating scene. Laura, feeling cornered, replied firmly, "I'm just shopping. I've done nothing wrong." Brian's face twisted with anger. "Don't get smart with me," he spat, stepping closer. "People like you think you can do whatever you want." The tension thickened as Laura stood her ground. "Officer, I'm not resisting. Please let me go." But Brian's temper flared. In a moment of blind rage, he pushed Laura roughly, causing her to stumble. When she cried out, he delivered a brutal kick to her stomach. A collective gasp rippled through the onlookers as Laura collapsed, clutching her belly and screaming, "My baby! Please, help!" Chaos erupted. "Call an ambulance," someone shouted. Bystanders rushed to Laura's side, while others turned their cameras toward Brian, whose expression betrayed no remorse. The ambulance arrived swiftly, whisking Laura to Clearbrook Medical Center. Meanwhile, Jacob, sitting in a distant conference room, felt his phone vibrate. Seeing the caller ID, his heart sank. It was Sophie, Laura's best friend. "Jacob," Sophie's voice trembled. "Laura's in the hospital. She's been attacked. The baby, it's bad. You need to come now." Jacob's world blurred. He left the meeting without a word, his mind racing as he booked the earliest flight home. The thought of Laura's pain and his absence filled him with guilt and fury. At the hospital, doctors fought to stabilize Laura and her unborn child. In the waiting room, Sophie sat with her head in her hands, her tears soaking the sleeves of her sweater. When Jacob arrived, she stood and embraced him tightly. "What happened?" Jacob demanded, his voice shaking with urgency. Sophie recounted the events, her voice breaking as she described Brian's brutality. Jacob's jaw tightened, his fists clenching. "His name?" he asked coldly. "Brian Dempsey," Sophie replied. He's been trouble since he came here. But this is beyond anything we could imagine. Jacob's eyes burned with determination. He will pay for this. Laura's surgery was successful, but the road ahead would be difficult. The baby, born prematurely, was placed in intensive care. When Jacob saw Laura, pale and fragile in her hospital bed, he knelt beside her and held her hand. "The baby," she whispered. "She's fighting." Jacob reassured her, just like her mom. Laura's eyes welled with tears. "I'm so sorry." "No," Jacob interrupted gently. "This wasn't your fault, and I'll make sure he never hurts anyone again." What no one in Clearbrook knew was that Jacob's life before Laura had been anything but ordinary. A former intelligence officer, he had spent years dismantling corrupt networks. His skills in gathering information and orchestrating justice were unparalleled, and now he would use them to protect his family. Jacob's first call was to an old ally, Marcus Trent, a civil rights attorney with a reputation for exposing corruption. Together, they devised a plan to bring Brian to justice. Evidence began pouring in. Complaints against Brian from his previous precinct painted a damning picture. Videos of the attack, combined with witness statements, ignited outrage in Clearbrook. A petition demanding Brian's immediate suspension gathered tens of thousands of signatures within days. Meanwhile, Jacob's quiet investigation revealed systemic issues within the department. Colleagues who had covered for Brian in the past were now under scrutiny. The pressure mounted as national media picked up the story, turning Brian into a symbol of unchecked authority. The community rallied behind Laura and her family. Peaceful protests filled the streets, with signs reading "Justice for Laura" and "No more abuse." At the forefront was Lucas Hart, a young man Laura had once mentored through difficult times. Lucas used his tech skills to create a website, justiceforlaura.com, where people could donate, sign petitions, and stay updated. In a heartfelt video, Lucas said, "Laura believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. Now it's time to stand up for her." His words resonated deeply, and the movement grew rapidly. Brian, once arrogant and untouchable, found himself isolated. His colleagues distanced themselves, and his superiors, under public pressure, placed him on administrative leave. Jacob, however, was far from finished. Through his intelligence contacts, Jacob uncovered a paper trail linking Brian to misconduct far beyond Clearbrook. Bribes, falsified reports, and intimidation tactics were exposed. With Marcus's legal expertise, they ensured that every piece of evidence was airtight. The climax came when Jacob confronted Brian directly, outside the police station. As reporters swarmed, Jacob approached, his voice calm but firm. "Brian Dempsey," he said, "you thought you could destroy my family, but now the world knows who you really are." Brian's bravado crumbled. Surrounded by cameras and protesters chanting for justice, he finally realized there was no escape. Weeks later, Brian was arrested on multiple charges. His resignation marked a turning point for Clearbrook, but the fight for systemic change continued. Jacob and Marcus worked tirelessly to push for police reform, while Laura focused on recovering and raising their daughter, Hope, whose name symbolized the resilience of her parents and the community. As they stood on the steps of Clearbrook City Hall, addressing the crowd that had supported them, Laura said, "This isn't just our victory. It's proof that when we stand together, we can create a better world for our children." Jacob, holding Hope in his arms, added, "We've shown that love and determination can triumph over hate and injustice. Let's keep fighting for what's right." The crowd erupted into applause, their cheers carrying a message of unity and hope. Clearbrook had been forever changed, and so had the lives of Laura, Jacob, and little Hope, a family bound by love, strengthened by adversity, and dedicated to building a brighter future.